Actually, I didn't want that cool looking slide to leave immediately. I just hit the button too soon. So thank you for coming to this. As I've told some of you before, this is actually my first release party, believe it or not. Even though I've had over 10 years in the industry, something would always happen where I couldn't show up to them. Usually because I would be at a different company. That was the reason most of the time. And then like I had a bunch of other projects that they just didn't do parties for them, and that was sad, right? Like some of the smaller projects and things like that. There's some really big ones I also just couldn't do because they were in like for BioShock, right? That was in Boston, and I wasn't living in Boston anymore, and I couldn't afford to go to Boston for a party, right? So this is actually the first one, so I'm really happy to be able to do this with you all. It's so great. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to do, and it's funny because a lot of you, most of you will know all of this, right? But this will be especially good for Professor Kim and for Yeji. The rest of you are going to be like, well, you're showing me like what I lived with, but that's okay, right? Because this will also go out on the YouTubes, and it will allow other people in the department to kind of see the progress we've made and everything. So let's go ahead and take a look here. So some project history. This started in March. And it was a proposal for a small CGT SLC collaboration grant. So this is actually, those of you that have taken my classes, you'll recognize that little like title page template from your design documents that I make you do. That's actually, I use those, right? So I give you the very things I use myself. So that's what it looked like. That's kind of my mock-up image for a stranger there. The little tagline, comprehension is survival. It's a little hard to see. Notice that we don't use that subtitle anymore in the game. The game is, I would say, a little gentler than I had originally proposed. I actually talk about the player dying in this in this pitch. I realized right away that would be kind of weird, and so we came up with the game over state being you go home with the one-way plane ticket that you have. I thought that was still a good enough game over without being like, I didn't want to discourage tourism, like, no. If things don't go well for you, you just might go home. It's going to be fine, right? So that document did have just a little bit of a darker edge to it than it originally turned out. And so this is like an original mock-up from that document. And so it's a little bit more status bar driven than the game ended up becoming. Which was kind of a conscious direction on my part. I didn't want it to become like a chase the bar as it fills up type of game. And this kind of rough image mock-up kind of shows a little bit more of that type of gameplay where you have like a food meter and a health meter and a status that changes as you go, right? So those elements I kind of got rid of on purpose. They're not really in the main game design document we made later. But you do see the action points, though. That is still there. I don't actually tell you. There's no like set total amount anymore. Notice it says like 5/8. You can get as many action points as the game lets you earn. But yes, action points were definitely held over from the original concept. And what's kind of interesting is some of the mini games that you developed for me, that I should say for everyone in YouTube listening to this, the team developed for me, do have kind of similar dialogue sort of concepts that this mock-up has. All right, these are some of the original pillars that I put in that pitch document. These are, I think, more or less what we managed to do, I think. So fun first, education second. That's kind of the biggest thing for me guiding this. I really didn't want the classroom, as I like to say, kind of encroaching. And so that makes a really interesting kind of project. So what I'm going to say straight away, and we'll find out when we deploy it in Huirin's class, right? There will be things that the average player, the intended player, obviously not Yeji or Juhi or anyone that like actually knows Korean well, but like the intended audience, there'll be a good bit they won't understand, and that's okay, right? I think that's actually quite fine. Because there will be enough they will understand. And so the idea is sort of encouragement, right? Like, and this kind of matches our new sort of research goals that we've kind of redeveloped, where we're hoping that the experience of playing this game, yeah, you'll learn some stuff, but really what's more important is that you get excited about learning the Korean language, Korean culture. It's certainly done that to me as I've been developing this. I get excited when I kind of remember a little thing here and there. And that's what you want to do, right? Encouragement. for people. So that's kind of that first pillar there. The second is that this is meant to be kind of a looping short play experience. So in my personal testing, this game takes around an hour to play. It can take longer probably if you really try to do everything we provide you to do, but it's really designed for 45 minutes, an hour, maybe a little less, just depends on how fast you try to do everything. The idea is you play, you get your result, and we fully expect that for newer players, that result's going to be a sad game over. You know, they're on the plane back, but then they'll hopefully play again and do a little better. And then the idea is that, hey, did you make it farther? I want people to talk to each other in class in Korean 101, being like, hey, did you get the ending? Okay, you got an ending. Was it one of the good endings? Was it one of the bad endings? Like, I kind of want that discourse to happen as people repeat the game. And I do think we accomplish that there. And that goes into mastery requires multiple play sessions, right? So now there's going to be elements of the game that it will be probably for the average Korean 101 student literally years before they can really understand well. But none of those things are actual things that are required to complete the game or even do well in it, right? There's a lot of NPC conversations that we put in there. There's some of the story bits that we put in there. That's all kind of conversational Korean. And yeah, like beginners are not going to get that stuff. But there's enough, just enough, I think, help that they can kind of get by and kind of pick up some context clues. And again, kind of get excited about knowing more to where they can understand more of it. The analogy, I was actually talking to someone from CGT today. They're going to put this in the newsletter that's coming out this game. So that's a cool bit of early promotion here. And what I was telling them is, I don't have a slide. I should have made a slide with this analogy because I think it's really good, but I don't have one, so I'll just verbally explain it. When you think about, there's games that are made, you know, as language learning games on one end of the spectrum, and then on the other end of the spectrum would be like buying Lies of P from Korea. That's a Korean-made game, right? So buying that game from Korea, importing it, and trying to play it as an English speaker. That's the other end of the spectrum, where if you do that, all the menus will be in Korean, the instruction manual will be in Korean. It will be impossible, right? You'll just look at this and you'll just, your eyes will glaze over and you'll give up. We're trying to be in the middle of that, right? Where it's not like super gentle. Like I said, you will not understand good chunks of it, but it's also got enough there for you that you're not going to, it's not going to be like you just bought an import game from Korea either. It's going to be in between those two extremes. Okay, so formation of the team. I can't stress enough how awesome this team did and how great it was. I'm going to do the sort of Hideo Kojima thing where I give myself all these ridiculous titles, but hey, I guess that's the that's the sort of privilege of the role I have. So I'm going to call myself creative director and executive producer. That's me, Rob Howard, right? And so we also have Professor Kim as the Korean language and culture director, and also I would say executive producer. And of course, Professor Kim comes to us from SLC. And then our incredible team here. So Juhi Lee, producer, concept artist, and 3D artist. Notice the multiple hats, right? Like when you have a small team like this, it's really important that you have some folks that can do a couple of different things, right? And so we had that throughout this. So Alex Silalahi, narrative designer, gameplay scripter, Connor Ellsworth, environment artist, 3D artist, gameplay scripter. We have Charles Wang, gameplay scripting, and Sydney Hobart, concept artist. So everyone performed really, really well. And you really can't do something like this without a team that is really highly, highly performant. And I can't stress enough that it was exactly that. All right, so some cool development history. So look at this white box. Look at that. That's Connor's original white box from way back in, whether that was like May or early June, whatever. I always like to look at the early stuff, right? Because when you see the more finished result, it's all the more impressive. So this is like the kind of city square fountain area, what it looks like in this kind of early form. So some things about the development. This is going to, for sort of non-game developers sound like sort of just tech speak, but it is really important that I note we used GitHub with file locking on an internationally distributed team during the summer. I think for Purdue CGT game development, this was like a massive win and like a big leap forward. I mean, we had people checking in work from different countries, just and not stomping on each other's work. That's what the file locking does. Getting GitHub to work in that way, because those of you that are familiar with GitHub know that GitHub isn't really designed to work like a Perforce or a sort of file, sort of a version control system that uses file locking. It's not really meant for that. So to get GitHub to do that, we had to use like a special Unreal plugin, and it was a real interesting struggle making sure that plugin worked for everybody, right? But once it did, it was, I would say, pretty smooth, and I thought worked quite well. I mean, I would be working and I would see the little yellow check mark pop up on a file that meant that like Alex or Connor or someone else was working on it, and that meant I could not work on it, and all that was happening just over the magic of the internet, right? So that's great. I mean, that's professional game development stuff. Really wonderful we got that working, and really meant that we were able to efficiently develop this during the summer months, which is good because, as we all know, once the semester starts, it's much harder to do that. Okay, so we're not going to necessarily look through like every second of these early videos, but like this is just a little look at what the game looked like really early on, like with some of the first coding in there. So it's like this is meant to be like a noir, sort of neo-noir sort of environment. You think about the movie Drive with Ryan Gosling or something like that. And so obviously when you don't have the neon street lights yet, you don't have much art yet, this is kind of what that looks like, right? So what you're seeing me do here is this is the skeletal structure of the game. You're a blogger, a travel blogger, you're making blog posts, and this is really the skeleton of the game. Just imagine that in between these little story blurbs that you're seeing, there's actual game events. Just that the game events haven't been developed yet, right? You kind of make the skeleton first, right? That's like literally like 20 minutes of the game maybe going by in like just a few seconds here because we just don't have that content in there yet. So that's kind of the structure of the game, is you're making these blog posts about your life in Korea, right? And you can see that's another one. These notifications to write your blog, they come up as you do game activities. So you do certain game activities, and all of a sudden, hey, you need to write a blog, and that's how the game works. All right, so this is like some midsummer progress, and those of you that are in portfolio classes know that I'm violating what I jokingly call the Musas rule because there's software UI in this video, but I figure this is a game development in progress video, so it's fine. You can see there's now real environment art here, but there's still some white box elements. You'll see, if I can actually try to rewind this in PowerPoint, it will let me do that well. Actually, if I just go back to the slide here, notice real briefly the little temp cinematic thing that comes up in this thing. This is what cinematics look like before you actually have one, right? So it should show up like once I start playing here in a second. Because we have an amazing intro cinematic. That's what it looked like before. It was longer than that. I skipped it. But that's what it looked like before we got Sydney's great art to be able to put together a real cinematic. So, but lots of progress by now. And like Connor did a lot of this work in the environment. Now notice some of the game activities right now are just like little gray boxes that float in the world, and you click on them. So they haven't been yet integrated into like cash registers and food bags and these sort of environment objects that you would actually recognize. And one thing we did early on as sort of a standard game development practice here is we made a beautiful corner. So Juhi did this, and what this does, it gives you a visual target. So this is going to look much nicer than the real game looks, because as you build the real game out, you have like optimizations you have to do. You have to like control the lighting, the amount of shadows that are being cast. You have to set the sort of graphical settings so that we can deploy on a wide variety of computers. So what you're looking at here is kind of like the max goodness, right? It gives us a target to work towards. The other thing this did was we knew we did not have 3D character artists on the team. So in order to get around that, we have these 2D billboard characters, and so this is kind of testing that. They're all kind of designed to face the player character at all times, and that can be a little creepy. That can, why is everyone in the game looking at me constantly? But the reason why you do that is to obscure the fact that they are paper-thin cutouts, right? So when they're made to look at you like this, you can never see the edge of the character, right? So that's why we did that. Rest assured, in the real game, there's a wide variety of different characters. This was just the initial test where he had like the generic male character there. So I thought it turned out looking really good, actually. It blends into the environment quite nicely. Okay, so here we're going to finally look at some, I will say, finished gameplay footage. Now, I'm going to be fixing bugs throughout in the next couple of weeks, but this is where we're at now, all right? At least the first sort of opening minutes of gameplay. So I'm going to go ahead and shut up and just kind of let this play out. Here's where I might want to put a little loading spinner, because the cinematics do take like a minute to load. So you're seeing how a tutorial works. So we do tutorialize games mechanics, which I think is really important. So beyond like the fact that it's basic sort of WASD controls, we don't kind of have that in there in terms of just how the game works. All of that is kind of put in these tutorials, and you can skip them. You actually can have that option as well. I'm actually really quite proud of this. I think this is like super professional that we have this type of stuff in there. This. One thing that's a completely unnecessary feature that I have in there is these are supposed to be blog posts. That's like the actual date and time as we're like pulls it off the blog, which I just kind of thought was neat. All right, so I'm just going to kind of walk around. We actually capture like audio. That's just an example of kind of the ambience that happens. How the game works is that like you have these game activities that you have available to you in each segment. It's kind of growing green markers. I developed basically based on asteroids that class how to do, right? So basically they try to not shoot the words that are just nonsense, right? so there's more tutorial content. Now, I did horrible on that, right? I actually did so, and that's like, I'll talk about this in the post. I did a bad job. And you can see like stuff like so now we're going to proceed to the next couple of actually by the way, those are fresh. I'm so okay, so with this one, this is kind of like, you're like, all right, so yay, and here's a plot. Activities that are not required to progress and they give you more action points, which let you try the main activities. Now, notice that there's some sun. Notice it's not quite so dark. Oh, here's your apartment. And notice because you played Word Blaster, there's like Word Blaster stuff. There's the poster from the food there. Like your apartment will fill up with things as you progress. Okay. So as you dwell in, it makes sunlight happen. We actually tied that to the day-night cycle. So if you do well in the game, you actually, it becomes daylight, right? In the beginning of each chapter, it always goes back to nighttime. So that's kind of a sneaky way a player can tell if there's some scenes, if it's not so dark. So here's one of the side activities. Buy books, for instance. You can buy books, drink soju, and these are not required things, but they will give you action points so you can retry them. So that's what happens here. It's based on how much money you spend, basically, is how we look at that. And that also put books in your apartment, by the way, which now you can see there's books there, right? So we have these things to fill up as you go. That took me a tremendous time. Way longer than it should. Really good looking apartment. I'm really proud of how good it looks, how well everything turned out. Okay, so here's one of Connor's minigames, Mindless Shopper. You have to select items from the grocery list. I kill it. Actually, I like playing this game done as well as I can. the bug happened here, so this is where this video stops, right? But I fixed it, right? I fixed it, so it's fine. The little blinking exit button is your hint that there is some bug I had to fix later. So that's basically the first chunk of the game. And so what I want to show you now, just to kind of skip ahead, so this would be a chapter ending. So this is where you played the required activities in that chapter, and now as a travel blogger, you're actually ready to write your blog post. So, and you can see it's like nice and in daylight outside, so things must have gone well for you. So let's check this out. Now we do give you a warning prompt. That was a good recent ad, because like you want to let them know that like you're kind of locking yourself in here. All right, so that's your result. And you can do this and see, yeah, things are going really well, right? Like my life in Korea is good so far, yay. And so, and then ends up happening is you then progress to the next chapter. It'll go back to nighttime. There'll be different music, different activities, all of that. However, conversely, we do also have game over. What happens when you don't do so well, right? What happens in the game is when you write a blog post and you haven't done well, you're sad. And when you're sad, you want to go home. And that's what you do, and it's game over. Now, I will tell you, it's actually impossible to fail chapter 1. We made that one, we kind of give that one to you, right? But all the other chapters you can fail if you don't do well enough at the games, okay? So let's take a look at what that looks like. Go back to the title and try again is what happens. All right, and then we finally have the ending. So let's say you make it through all the chapters and get to the end, and there's some really cool story things that happen. My hope is that even the sort of amount of conversational Korean we have to have in the game to get this across, it kind of increases. But I do think you can kind of sort of figure out what's going on contextually. And so I won't spoil that plot here, but I will just say, okay, you get to the end, and now what you do is you kind of end the game and kind of figure out how you did. This would be an example of a bad ending. So what we mean by this is you got through the game, so you should feel good about yourself. That's definitely a good accomplishment. But as far as your protagonist's life in Korea, maybe not the best. So let's take a look at this. Yeah, see kind of a dingy apartment, and Alex did a great job putting those images together for us and writing all of this story. A lot of the story, most of the story comes from Alex. We really appreciate all that work there. You get the sad music, right? The sad tag ending. So, okay, cool, you got through the game, but we can do better, right? We can do better than this. So here's an example. I don't want to spoil any of the really good endings. So what I did for this, for the YouTube audience, is this is a medium ending. This is you did fine, right? Not horrible, not awesome, but just fine. So let's look at what a medium ending looks like. Yeah, so you're in a nice place. It's not a penthouse, which is one of the endings. But you're fine, right? Just fine, right? So the music, the image there, all that represents the fact you did pretty good. But still, there are other endings. And by the way, there's lots and lots of endings that we put in there. And so, again, my hope is that players sort of talk about which ending they got, right? And basically how it works is that there's a certain amount of random bad endings, a certain amount of random medium endings, and a certain amount of random really good endings that you can get. So you may end up getting the same ending a couple of times, just the way the randomness works, but there are a number of different endings, quite a few actually. Okay, so what I wanted to do to wrap this presentation up is do a brief post-mortem of the game. By the way, again, after Connor's work on the environment, I mean, that's the full city. That's kind of like my beauty shot of the city. It's so good looking, right? I mean, so awesome. This isn't going to be quite as in depth as like a full postmortem, especially because I do want this to be kind of celebratory, but definitely some things to talk about here. So what went right? So for me, and I hope this doesn't sound conceited, but it is kind of a big deal to me, and it means a lot to me actually, personally. So when you work in the games industry for a long time, you have to remember that you're always working on a slice of something. You never get to be the Hideo Kojima of anything, or the Miyamoto of anything, or fill in your favorite game designer, right? You're just working on a slice. Even if you become like a lead game designer or something like that, you're still just sort of working on a chunk of some bigger thing, right? So it's a totally different endeavor to actually be, what we would call a creative director, or someone who is actually directing an entire production. Much different thing. And for me, it was immensely satisfying that, yes, I could do this, right? Like my feeling of satisfaction, especially in the last month or so, you sort of get to a point where you realize, yeah, this is happening, right? Like I always knew it would, but you get to the point where you see the finish line, it's coming together. That's really a wonderful experience. It's kind of different than even the experiences I had in the industry, where I'm proud of my work, but it's like one little chunk of a much larger thing. Here I'm kind of overseeing the whole thing, and it was tremendously gratifying that I could even do this. Now, the reason I could do this, though, is because of the student team here that's sitting here in this room that I'm talking to right now. The amount of fantastic work that was done, I can't say can't say enough how impressed I was with that. How sort of determined, self-motivated everyone was. The team kind of ran itself in many ways and did so much really good work. And it was really a lot of fun. When I stopped doing the weekly meetings, because kind of got to the point where it had to be just me working on the project, it was like genuinely sad for me not to have the weekly scrums, with you all. So really, that was a huge thing that went right. Is the team? We recruited quite well, and I have to give Professor Kim credit because Charles, you've been in my classes, but I didn't know you quite as well, and so Professor Kim recommended you. You came in, did a great job. So yeah, really great team. You should all feel very proud of yourselves. The other thing I'm really happy about with this is the scope. So this was obviously a highly ambitious project for us to tackle. But really, when we look at what we set out to make, we did that. We made what we said we were gonna do, right? With very limited cuts. I mean, when I think about what our scope cuts were, it was things like, we made the map a little smaller, right? Like, okay, right, that's fine. There's some small bits of content that I kind of pushed to the side for later, but it's like small things. Some of the features that have to do with like processing some of the underlying data, because our research goals changed. I kind of shoved that to the side a little bit, but that's only because the research goals changed. Otherwise, like, gosh, yeah, I mean, we went and made this thing with very little cuts, and that's awesome. Like, that's fantastic, right? That's, again, not to sound terribly conceited, it makes me feel really good about my ability to understand what's possible, but it's also a credit to all of you for making that happen. So really, really cool. Okay, so stuff that we can definitely learn from here. For me, I love this image of, we call this the bad customer, by the way, this guy. Juhi did a great job on those character arts. So when you're doing this sort of experimental gameplay, right, where you're trying to do these language things, but you're trying to make it be fun but not pedagogical. It's really hard to test this in the same way that I can sort of test gameplay in the classes that I teach here. Like, when someone does like a first-person shooter map, like that's like, I understand really well what's going to work and not work there, right? I can look at someone's map and be like, well, this is not so optimal because of X, Y, and Z reasons here. That's hard to do with this. Some of this stuff we really just have to find out when the Korean 101 students play it, right? Now, I do think there's aspects they'll enjoy, but there might be things that we're like, okay, in the future, we won't design activities that are like this. Who knows, right? It's hard to say. And That's kind of a concern. I don't think there's anything we could have done about it. I think it's the nature of the beast, but definitely a thing to think about. Definitely took a long time to get to where I can get QA hammering on this. In fact, that's really just starting now, honestly, to where we have QA volunteers that are actually doing proper playthroughs and finding all those little nitpicky things and bigger things than that as well. So that's just something that as I work on future projects, I'll think about. Like some of that was I just didn't think it was worth testing until it got to a certain point, and that's something I have to think about for future projects, when exactly to really get QA going, apart from the kind of testing that we do as developers. The other thing I'll say is I was really dumb about, I should have thought about having some kind of English cheat system for development purposes. Like a lot of the data tables that we're deriving the Korean from, once they were converted to Korean, it's like, well, can't play our own game anymore. I mean, we have access to the data tables and stuff, but like I could have planned that, I think, a little bit better in retrospect. The only silver lining there is it makes me much like the real players when I play this thing. So I guess that's kind of good. But yeah, I probably could have done a little bit of a better job making sure. I will notice that some of Alec's data tables, actually, you were thinking of this because a lot of your data tables actually have an English column in them, and I should have done mine that way. So I give you credit for thinking through a little more thoroughly on that front. Okay, future plans for the project now that we're at this point. So, of course, deploying for the research, right? That's sort of what's immediately on the agenda. By immediately, I think it's like a few weeks or something like that. So, yeah, we're going to fix up all those little bugs that Yeji is finding, that some of our other volunteers are finding, that we're going to find as we play our own game. And then, there are some wish list items if I have time. Now, my family wouldn't be happy with me if I maintained my current development pace because I have been crunching for a while on this. So, but I still want to make sure that I'm trying to do little things. Actually, the one big thing that, as far as a nice little wish list item, I got to get credits in there. I got to get you all credited in the game. That was something I was really hoping to get in the build today, and it just didn't happen. That will definitely happen. Credits. That will be the first thing I do after bugs are fixed this month. Other things is hyping the game. So we did talk to the CGT folks. We're going to be in their newsletter that's coming out, so that's really cool. There's definitely going to be some other opportunities like that because word is getting out about this, right? Without me even having to do much because people are talking and people are excited about this. Whenever people see this, they're like, wow, this is amazing, right? So I think as we get this out in front, there'll just be more and more things that come up. I should try to get some kind of website somewhere, whether it's something on my own portfolio or I get something through Purdue or something, I don't know, but needs a website for sure, some kind of Conversoft stranger website. More long-term goals, absolutely I want this to eventually be on Steam 100%, right? I do think that there's some work that needs to be done. I think there's a big difference between like how this needs to exist for Korean 101 and how it would need to exist for Steam in terms of its game design execution. Basically, the short version of what I think needs to happen is there probably needs to be like some kind of internal intuition system where some of that conversational Korean gets like jarred into English temporarily or something, thinking about it as a commercial type project as opposed to like purely something we're experimenting with. And I have some other ideas about commercial, things that would need to have happen. And as far as like other ads, this is something that Professor Kim and I have been talking about, intercultural competency editions. So there's a lot of really great stuff that can go into a game like this that isn't trying to do the really hard work of like teaching a language, right? There's a lot of things about Korean culture. We got some of that in there with some of the side activities. There's the Korean cultural artifacts that didn't make it into any of these videos. I probably will get it into the trailers and things I make where you're collecting sort of these Korean items and it goes into your travel blog and you can read about what they are. So we did get some of that, but there's a lot more we can get into the game later. And of course, that's going to require, finding other grants and all of this to, actually properly do this. So I do think, though, there's a tremendous future for this project going forward. All right, and finally, thank you. This is one of my favorite shots, actually. This is one of the medium endings. I call this the gangs all here. That's my nickname for it, because I just kind of arranged all of the characters, because one of the medium endings that Alex wrote just made me think to do this. So I thought it was a cool image to end on here. So thank you once again. Those of you watching this on YouTube, thanks for giving this a view and checking this out. And once again, just thank you to my team for helping me make this. You should all feel really great about your accomplishment. All right, that's it, everyone. Thank you so much.